All right, you know what time it is. It is Sunday morning. Easily probably one of my favorite times of the week. Spreadsheet is done. We are in the basement ready to record our video. Thank you guys for tuning in. We're talking about Bristol today. If you're new here, if you want to like, comment, share, retweet our content, it allows us to reach more people. If you want to subscribe to our channel, that is greatly appreciated as well. We're only 40 subscribers away from 1,000, so thank you, thank you, thank you. If you want access to the spreadsheet or just to engage with us, ask us questions, hang out, hop over on X. It's at FastCarsFM. We also post a spreadsheet over there for the Truck Series and the Xfinity Series. So if you're only playing NASCAR DFS for the Cup Series or only watching these YouTube videos, just know there's some content for Xfinity and trucks over there too. Then, hey, finally, if you're having a good weekend, you just want to say thanks, throw a couple dollars here or there. There's a couple of links in the support tab to do that. And I've gotten a good amount of tips this year, so I really appreciate that. Um, but when we talk about Bristol, there's a couple things we got to talk about. So first and foremost, it's a 500 lap race, which is crazy. So because of that, it's very high scoring. If you don't have these lap leaders in your lines, you're screwed. Every 15 seconds or however long it takes them to get around the track, points are awarded for the fast lap and the lap leader. And really, that lap leader, if you don't have them in your line, as we saw yesterday with the Xfinity Series race with Kyle Larson, there's no way you're going to hit the cash line. Now, do I think one driver is going to be that dominant today? No. However, I would still prioritize lap leaders over place differential plays. The only little caveat that's in there is the tires. So if you didn't watch practice or some of these races last year, we're pushing for tire wear. We want tire wear, which is good, but there's also going too extreme where the tires just completely fall off and are cording and drivers have to pit. Um, and a lot of drivers said it literally is like a flip of the switch of, when you have grip and when you don't have grip. So if depending on the types of runs that we get today, you're probably going to see a lot of different comers and goers, maybe guys blowing tires, having issues, caution. So that could limit the Dominator upside, for sure. And you might want to be a little bit more conservative than you typically are at Bristol, but generally speaking, you still want to target those lap leaders. So when we get to the driver by driver breakdown, at the top range, you got Hamlin, Larson, Blaney, and Bell. For me, Blaney's the one that is kind of the odd man out up here. He's more of a GPP option, in my opinion. His next gen numbers at Bristol really aren't that good, especially when you can compare him to the other drivers he's priced around. So, average finish of 18th here, 18th here. His practice times were okay. He had a good qualifying round. He has good track position. He has been running well this year, but again, track history suggests that this will not be a good track for him. So who is a good track for? Well, really, it's Larson, Hamlin, and Bell. Having some combination of these drivers in your line, I feel like is a good way to start. All three of these drivers, I would say, are probably my primary lap leaders, the guys I feel the most confident in that can go out there and lead laps, a bulk of laps too, pick up fast laps. So Larson dominated that Xfinity race yesterday. In the four next gen starts here, his average finish is 3.3. And over those races, he has more than 500 plus, laps led, which is by far the most in the field. His good track position. He's been on track all weekend for the Truck Series and the Xfinity Series. And oh yeah, if you look at practice, he was number one across all the averages. So not saying, things can't go wrong for Kyle Larson, but just on paper, if things go the way they should, it should be a Kyle Larson show today. Um, who are some other drivers that could potentially contend? Well, Denny Hamlin, he's won here two out of the four next gen races at Bristol Concrete. His average finish is not that far off of Larson's of 3.8. Like Larson, he starts up front. He's projected to be a primary lap leader. So Denny Hamlin, Kyle Larson, you can feel good about both of those guys. Don't count out Christopher Bell either. There's four drivers in the field today who are 4 for 4 for finishing it inside the top 10 here in the next gen era. That's going to be Larson, Hamlin, and then Christopher Bell is the third one there. All of them are solid. He had the second most laps. He is the second most laps led here across those four races, only behind Larson. Gives you the most place differential upside, but he's also the cheapest. But I would say Hamlin and Larson are probably going to be, a little bit more higher owned than Christopher Bell. So if you're paying up for all those lap leaders, you're going to have to get some place differential options in your lineup as well. Byron's expensive. He's kind of tough to get to. With 500 laps, we're really prioritizing lap leaders. And if you're plugging in Byron, you're most likely sacrificing a Hamlin, Larson, or Bell up here, which can work depending on, if any of these drivers hit. You're just getting the right combination. Um, However, with the tire concerns, that could play an advantage to Byron, somewhat if place differential is, a little bit more valuable than it typically is. He's just expensive, and I think there's some cheaper place differential plays you can get. But another guy I really like, he's kind of expensive, but the fourth driver that we talked about that's 4 for 4 for finishing inside the top 10 is Chase Elliott. He has an average finish here of 4.8. For whatever reason, these concrete tracks are pretty good for him. Gives you some place differential upside. Then you got Joey Logano. He's going to be really popular in cash games and tournaments. His next gen stats here really aren't that good, but he did DNF in two of those races. Pretty much starts DFL. We know he's going to move forward, but I don't expect him to be a lap leader by any means. So, depending on how you're paying up here, you may or may not be able to get some of these place differential plays. You can't play everyone up here. Briscoe, just the guy I'm not really getting to. Kind of his numbers suggest he should run around where he starts. And I'd rather pay up for either some of the place differential or lap leaders or pay down. Now, when we used to talk about Bristol, we always would talk about Kyle Busch, just how dominant he was here. I mean, he was a lock almost every time we would come here. He would be the first guy you'd click on. But times have changed. He's not with that team anymore. He just isn't running as well as we typically see. Kind of starts in this 15th range. I don't really see him moving forward, that many spots. Now, Chastain, his practice numbers were not good. Really, none of the Trackhouse guys look good in practice, and it is concerning that their qualifying times were also pretty bad as well. However, if we do think the tires are going to be an issue today, and that's going to, um, cause some chaos or some cautions or really open up like these different comers and goers, I think that's going to play into Ross Chastain's hands, just with how far in the field he starts. So, he's also pretty good here. His average finish is 13.5. So if you just get an average day out of Chastain starting 35th, that's a lot of upside. He's also a lot cheaper than Logano and Elliott and Byron, some of those other guys we talked about. Bubba Wallace is a nice pivot play off of Ross Chastain. He won't see the same amount of ownership. He doesn't have the same amount of place differential upside, but I'd argue that his finishing potential is probably a lot better than Ross Chastain's, at least based off of just how they're running this year in the times in practice. So, nice tournament option there. Gibbs, this has been a good track for Gibbs, but starting sixth is just tough to get there. Not really a lot of upside, in my opinion. Bristol has also been a pretty good track for Christopher Buescher. He does have a win here. He's finished top 10 3 or 4 times, average finish of 6.5. Really like the price and the place differential upside you're getting out of Buescher today. So I really like him. However, a track that has not been good, for a driver or this track, I should say, has been Tyler Reddick. Bristol has just been not a good, strong spot for him. Average finish here of 22.5. Does give you a little bit of place differential upside, maybe a nice pivot play off of Buescher, but, you know, his history suggests he's probably going to, stay in the 20s today. Now, Bowman's your pole leader, and he's pole sitter, starts on the pole position. He's a lot cheaper than Larson, Hamlin, and Bell, but he has them all right behind him too, which is, concerning for Bowman. And also with these tires, I feel like that limits and hinders, the lap leading upside that the pole sitter would have, or really any of these drivers in the field. So, maybe he goes out there, leads a good amount of stage one. Just be interesting to see once he gets back in traffic how this car can handle. Keselowski and Josh Berry, just for different reasons. I'm really just not getting here, more or less just of where they start. I don't really think they have that much upside. Ryan Preece, though, I do like. Again, he was slow in practice, which is a concern. However, given his track history here, his average finish is 11th. I also like his price tag, his starting position. So just if you can have an average day, Ryan Preece is going to look like a good place differential option, just kind of like Christopher Buescher is. So, if you don't want to pay up for the Logano's, the Chastains, the Elliots, what are some other drivers in the field that you can still get some good place differential upside from that kind of save some salary? I think Buescher and Ryan Preece make a lot of sense in that regard. And Cindric's kind of the same thing that we talked about with Bubba Wallace and Ross Chastain. I think a lot of people are, generally speaking, not as much of a gap with the other drivers, but I think Priest will be probably slightly higher owned than Austin Cindric, but Cindric's a nice pivot option if you want someone else to kind of avoid some of the chalkier plays. I don't really know how chalky Priest is going to be. McDowell's actually run good here. He's an average finish of 10th, which is encouraging, especially for a driver that's only $7,100. The concern is he starts 13th, and if he doesn't have an average day, if he has a below average day, it's really going to hurt your line. So he just carries a lot of risk. Hocevar starts a little bit too far forward for me. Gregson, hey, if you can't pay up for some of those other place differential plays we're talking about, you kind of find yourself in this range. I really don't mind Gregson, really just based off of where he starts, but I'm not expecting much out of him, but you really don't need that much out of him either. Um, Suarez starts in the 20s, probably finishes in the 20s. Same with Eric Jones. It just really hasn't been a good track for him in the next gen era with Legacy Motor Club. AJ Allmendinger is having a good season, but he starts too far forward. Ricky Stenhouse, maybe he goes out there as an early lap leader, but when you got Bowman, Bell, Larson, Hamlin all around you, it's very tough to see Stenhouse going out there and leading laps and just getting a good finish. Zane Smith, Austin Dillon, kind of in the same boat. They kind of start where I think their ceiling kind of is. I don't really think they can finish too much further ahead than that. Todd Gillen, kind of like Noah Gregson, his numbers aren't great. His average finish here is 23rd, but he's so cheap and he starts so deep in the field that, again, you really don't need that much out of him, especially if you're able to pay up for some of these other drivers up top. Um, Justin Haley, not getting there, starts too far forward. So who are my value plays, right? If you're up there paying for up all those guys, you're gonna have to come down here. Two guys I like the most, for A, their price, B, where they start, and kind of their history here. It's gonna be John Hunter Nemechek and Cole Custer. So John Hunter Nemechek, had decent speed. He has an average finish here inside the top 20. So, if he can just have an average day starting 32nd for $6,000, that'll work. Another guy, his practice times were decent is Cole Custer. Only has one race here. He had an eighth place finish. Am I expecting him to duplicate that? No. But if he's able to get inside the top 20, just like John Hunter Nemechek, that'll be a good day. And once you get below that, it's just kind of tough. Like SVG has just not been very good this year. He starts deep, probably finishes deep. Ty Dillon has been very good this year. He just starts 12th, so it's hard to trust them. Jesse Love, first Cup Series race, starting 19th. I don't really see him moving forward too many spots. Maybe you can play Corey LaJoie. He basically starts DFL. We know his car probably won't have the same finishing potential that John Hunter Nemechek and Cole Custer do, but he's cheaper. He starts deep, offers you a little bit more place differential. Maybe if you think this race is chaotic with the tires, maybe that helps him. And then Herb starts a little bit too far forward for me. And Cody Ware, I think it's just going to be a back marker play. And I really highly doubt Josh Bilicki and this MBM team are going to make it all 500 laps. So that's going to do it for the Bristol breakdown. Should be interesting to see how it plays out, but hopefully that's been helpful for you guys. Hope everyone enjoys the race, and we'll catch you next time.